Let me tell you something tonight that I believe with every fiber of my being, something that took me years to understand, something that cost me tears and sleepless nights and moments of doubt so profound I wasn't sure I would find my way back. I want to talk to you about hard times, not to depress you, not to remind you of your pain, but to liberate you from the false notion that difficulty is your enemy. Because I have come to know after decades of studying human beings and their journeys that hardship is not the opposite of a good life. Hardship, my friend, is frequently the very material from which a good life is constructed. Now, I grew up poor, and I don't mean that as a badge of honor, because poverty is not honorable. Poverty is not noble. Poverty is a problem to be solved, not a condition to be celebrated. But what I learned growing up with very little is that circumstances do not have the final word on your destiny. Your philosophy does. Your response does. Your decision about what this difficulty means and what you are going to do about it, that is what determines everything. You see, most people, when life gets hard, they ask the wrong question. They say, why is this happening to me? And that question, while understandable, while completely human, leads you down a path that ends nowhere productive. Because the universe does not owe you an explanation. Life does not send you a memo explaining why winter arrived. Winter just comes. And the question is not why did winter come, but what are you going to do now that it is here? Let me give you a better question. When life is hard, the question worth asking is, what is this teaching me? What is this season of difficulty trying to deposit into my character that I could not receive during the easy seasons? Because here is what I have found, and I challenge you to test this against your own experience. You never learn your greatest lessons during the good times. You learn them during the hard times. The pressure teaches, the struggle reveals, the difficulty forges something in you that comfort simply cannot produce. Think about iron. Iron in its natural state is mixed up with rock and dirt and all manner of impurity. You cannot make a sword out of raw iron ore. You cannot make a bridge or a building or anything of lasting value. But you put that iron into fire. You apply tremendous heat and pressure, and the impurities rise to the surface and burn away. And what you're left with is something entirely different in quality and in capability: steel. And that is precisely what difficulty does to a human being who responds to it correctly. The impurities of laziness, of excuses, of shallow thinking, of complacency, they come to the surface under pressure. And if you have the courage to let them burn away rather than clutch them to yourself, what emerges is a stronger, wiser, more capable version of who you were before the fire started. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, Jim, you don't know what I'm going through. You don't know how bad it is. And you're right. I don't know the specifics of your particular burden, but I know this. Whatever it is survivable. And not just survivable, but transformable. Because I have met people in the deepest valleys of human experience, people who lost everything, people who buried children, people who went bankrupt not once but twice, people who were betrayed by those they trusted most. And I have seen those same people, years later, standing on the other side of their catastrophe with a wisdom and a grace and a depth of character that they simply could not have possessed without having gone through what they went through, not in spite of it, because of it. But here is the critical point. That transformation does not happen automatically. Going through difficulty does not guarantee you come out better. Some people go through tremendous hardship and they come out bitter. They come out closed. They come out with walls so high that nothing good can get in and nothing meaningful can get out. The same fire that tempers steel also melts weaker metals entirely. And the difference, the absolute deciding factor is not what happens to you. It is who you decide to be in response to what happens to you. So let's talk about that response, because that is where your power lives. That is where the leverage is. You may not control the economy. You may not control other people's choices. You may not control illness or accident or the particular hand that circumstance has dealt you. But you absolutely, unquestionably control your response. Viktor Frankl, a man who survived unimaginable horrors in the concentration camps of World War II, wrote that between stimulus and response there is a space. And in that space is your freedom. In that space is your power. In that space is the difference between a life that circumstance controls and a life that you direct. Most people live as though that space does not exist. Something difficult happens and they react immediately, automatically, like a reflex rather than a decision. Someone says something harsh and they fire back with anger. A setback occurs and they collapse into despair. A plan falls apart and they abandon the dream entirely. They have given their response away without even realizing they possessed it. What I want you to understand tonight is that you have a choice. Even in the hardest moment of your life, you have a choice. Even when the walls are closing in and the options seem limited and the path forward is obscured by circumstances beyond your control, you still have a choice about how you carry yourself through it. You have a choice about what story you tell yourself about what this means. You have a choice about whether you look for the lesson or only nurse the wound. And that choice, made consistently, day after day, in small moments and large ones, is what ultimately writes the story of your life. Now let's talk about the practical reality of hard times, because I don't want to be merely philosophical with you. Philosophy without application is just entertainment. I want you to leave here tonight with something you can use. The first thing I want to address is the temptation, and it is a powerful temptation, to quit. When life is hard, when you are tired and discouraged and the results are not matching the effort and the days are grinding rather than flowing, something inside you begins to negotiate. It whispers that maybe you misread the map, maybe the dream was too big, maybe the timing is wrong, maybe some people just aren't meant for certain things, and maybe you are one of those people. Let me tell you about quitting. Quitting feels like relief in the moment. It genuinely does. When you lay down a heavy burden, there is an immediate sensation of relief. The weight is gone. The pressure is off. But here is what quitting actually delivers. It delivers a debt that comes due later. Because the relief you feel today when you quit is borrowed against a future of regret that you will absolutely pay back with interest. Every person who quit when they were close to their breakthrough carries that knowledge with them, not as wisdom, but as a wound. The question they cannot stop asking themselves is, what would have happened if I had just stayed a little longer? I am not telling you to stay in something that is genuinely wrong for you. Discernment matters, wisdom matters. Sometimes the right move is indeed to redirect, to adjust course, to recognize that a particular path was not the right one. There is no shame in that. But that decision must come from clarity and wisdom, not from exhaustion and discouragement, because exhaustion and discouragement are terrible advisors. They always recommend the same thing: stop, give up, it's too hard. And if you listen to them every time they speak, you will spend your life starting things and abandoning them, and you will wonder why nothing ever works out for you. The discipline is learning to distinguish between a reason to redirect and a reason to rest. Sometimes what feels like a signal to quit is actually a signal to rest, to recover, to step back from the battle briefly, not because you are leaving the battlefield, but because you need to return to it with renewed strength. There is no weakness in rest. The farmer does not work the field through every season without pause. The field must rest. The soil must recover its capacity to produce, and so must you. Take your rest, but do not mistake rest for retreat. Here is something else about hard times that I have come to understand deeply. Hard times reveal what you actually believe, as opposed to what you think you believe. It is easy to say you believe in your dreams when everything is going well. It is easy to say you trust the process when the process is producing results. But the moment the results stop coming, the moment the path gets difficult, the moment other people question your choices and circumstances contradict your expectations, that is when you find out what you actually believe. And this is valuable. This is tremendously valuable, because you cannot correct a belief you don't know you have. The difficulty exposes the cracks in your philosophy, the weakness in your conviction, the places where your commitment was perhaps more shallow than you realized. And knowing where those places are gives you the opportunity to address them, to shore up the foundation, to build your belief system on something more substantial than the assumption that things will always go smoothly, because they won't. They never do, not for anyone. The most successful people in any field will tell you that the road was not smooth. It was not a steady upward trajectory from where they started to where they arrived. It was full of setbacks and detours and moments of genuine doubt. The difference is not that they faced fewer difficulties than you. The difference is that they developed a relationship with difficulty that allowed them to keep moving through it rather than being stopped by it. Let me tell you about a concept I call the price and the promise. Everything worth having in life has a price. Not necessarily a financial price, though sometimes that too, but always a price in terms of effort and patience and endurance and sacrifice. And paired with every price is a promise, the promise of what that price purchases when paid in full. The problem most people have is that they want the promise without paying the price, or they begin paying the price and then stop before it's been paid in full and then wonder why they didn't receive what was promised. Think about it this way. Suppose you were building a house. You buy the land, you pour the foundation, you frame the walls, you do all of that work, and then right before the roof goes on, you decide it's too hard, it's taking too long, the results aren't coming fast enough, so you walk away. Now what do you have? You have an unfinished structure that you cannot live in, that provides you no shelter, that delivers none of the warmth and comfort and security that you were building toward. And the tragedy is, you were so close. The roof was next, but you never found out because you stopped just before the breakthrough. I have seen this pattern more times than I can count. People stop at what turns out to be the very edge of their breakthrough. They stop when the result was almost there, when a little more time and a little more effort and a little more faith would have brought them to the threshold of what they'd been working toward. And they stop, not because the goal was impossible, but because the discomfort of the process became greater than their desire for the result. And this points to something fundamental. If your desire for the result is not strong enough to sustain you through the difficulty of the process, you will not reach the result. It really is that simple, which means that one of your most important tasks during hard times is to continuously reconnect with your desire, to remind yourself not just of where you are, which is hard, but of where you are going, which is compelling, to lift your eyes from the difficult present and look toward the possible future, not as an escape from reality, but as fuel for continuing the journey. I used to do this exercise, and I recommend it to anyone who is going through a difficult season. I would ask myself every single morning, why does this matter? Why am I doing this? What is the life that I am building toward? And is that life worth the price I am currently paying? And if the answer to that last question was yes, and most of the time, if you've thought carefully about your goals, the answer is yes, then I would get up and continue. Not because I felt like it, not because it was easy, but because the destination was worth the journey, even when the journey was hard. Now I want to talk about something that is rarely discussed in conversations about hard times, and that is the role of other people. Because when life gets hard, the people around you matter enormously, and not just in the obvious ways. Let me explain. When you are going through difficulty, you will encounter two kinds of people. The first kind is the people who pull you down, who remind you of what you've lost, who point to your setbacks as evidence that your dreams were unrealistic, who share their doubt with you under the guise of concern, who say things like, "I'm only telling you this because I care about you," and then proceed to list every reason why you should give up. These people are not your allies in hard times. They may be well-meaning. They may genuinely care about you in their way, but their counsel is poison. Not because they wish you harm, but because their own fear limits what they are able to imagine for you. The second kind of person is rare and precious. These are the people who look at your struggle and see not evidence of your failure, but evidence of your growth. These are the people who have been through difficulty themselves and have come out the other side and can therefore offer you something that the comfortable cannot offer: perspective. They know that hard times are not permanent. They know that the valley is not your destination. They know that what you are going through is part of the story, not the end of the story. And when you are with these people, something shifts inside you. Their faith in your possibility stirs your own faith. Their presence reminds you that survival is possible because survival is something they have personally accomplished. Seek these people out. Guard their friendship with everything you have. And when you are in their presence, absorb everything they are willing to share with you, because what they carry, that hard-won wisdom, that seasoned perspective, is worth more than almost anything you could purchase with money. And here is the other side of that coin. When you come through your difficult season, and you will come through it, become that person for someone else. The wisdom you gain in the valley is not meant to be hoarded. It is meant to be shared. There is someone right now, perhaps someone you know, who is standing exactly where you stood 2 years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago, terrified and confused and convinced that their situation is unique in all of human history. And your story, your experience of going through difficulty and coming out the other side, is exactly what they need to hear. One of the most powerful things a human being can do for another human being is simply to say, "I have been where you are, and I made it through, and you will too." There is no elaborate philosophy required, no sophisticated system or program or protocol, just one honest voice bearing witness to the possibility of survival and growth and transformation. That is enough. That is often more than enough. Now let me say something about time, because time and difficulty are deeply connected, and I think most people misunderstand the relationship between them. Hard times feel permanent. This is one of the great lies of difficulty. When you are in the middle of a difficult season, your mind does something quite natural but quite destructive. It projects the current conditions indefinitely into the future. You feel as though this is simply how things are and how they will continue to be. The pain you feel today seems like it will be the pain you feel forever. The limitation you are experiencing right now seems like a permanent ceiling rather than a temporary condition. But consider your own history for a moment. Think back to a difficulty you faced 5 years ago. Think back to a problem or a pain or a season of struggle that felt at the time like it might never end. Can you think of one? Now look at where you are today relative to that moment. The thing that felt permanent was not permanent. The season changed. The circumstances shifted. You moved through it and arrived somewhere new. This is not a coincidence. This is the nature of time and human experience. Seasons change. Not always as quickly as we would like, not always without leaving marks, but they change. The winter does not last forever. Every difficult season in your life has an end built into it, even if you cannot see it from inside the season. Understanding this does not make the difficulty disappear, but it changes your relationship to it. When you know that the season will change, you stop fighting the fact that the season exists and start asking yourself how you want to move through it. You start asking not just when will this end, but who do I want to be by the time it does? And that is a tremendously more productive question, because it shifts your focus from waiting to becoming, from passive endurance to active transformation, from simply surviving the difficulty to being shaped by it in ways you choose rather than ways you stumble into. Because here is something I want you to understand clearly. You are going to be changed by the difficulty you go through. That is not optional. Difficulty changes people. It always does. The only question is whether you will be changed in ways that diminish you or in ways that enlarge you. And the answer to that question depends entirely on whether you are an active or a passive participant in your own transformation during the hard times. Let me talk about the concept of gratitude in hard times because I know this is challenging for some people to hear. I have shared this idea with audiences over the years and I have seen people resist it, sometimes quite vigorously. They say, Jim, how can I be grateful when everything is falling apart? How can I find something to appreciate when I am losing things, when I am struggling, when the pain is real and the resources are thin? I understand the resistance, I genuinely do, but let me offer you a different frame. Gratitude in hard times is not about pretending that things are better than they are. It is not about cheerful denial of real difficulty. It is about something much more strategic than that. It is about deliberately seeking evidence that life contains more than just the difficulty you are currently experiencing, even when the difficulty is dominant. Because here is what happens when you only focus on what is wrong. Your brain, which is remarkably good at finding what it is looking for, will find more and more of what is wrong. You will see evidence of scarcity everywhere. You will notice the closed doors and miss the open windows. You will catalog your losses and fail to account for your resources. And you will end up with a profoundly distorted picture of your situation. Not because you are weak or foolish, but because you have been directing your attention exclusively toward the evidence that supports the conclusion that things are terrible. Gratitude deliberately redirects your attention. It says, yes, this is hard, I see the hardship, and also, what is still working? What do I still have? Who is still in my corner? What strengths have I demonstrated in getting this far? What have I already survived that I wasn't sure I could survive? And when you ask those questions honestly, the answers are almost always more substantial than you expected. Not because your problems are small, they may be quite large, but because your resources, your resilience, your relationships, your intelligence, your experience, these are also real and also large, and you cannot effectively deploy resources you have forgotten you possess. So gratitude in hard times is not a spiritual nicety. It is a strategic practice. It is how you maintain access to your full inventory of assets during the very seasons when you most need every advantage available to you. I want to talk now about the relationship between hard times and purpose, because I believe this is one of the most important connections a person can discover. For most people, purpose is something they think about when life is comfortable. When the bills are paid and the relationships are stable and the health is good and the calendar has some open space in it, then they find themselves asking questions like, what is this all for? What am I here to do? What would make my life genuinely meaningful? But purpose is not a comfortable times question. Purpose is a hard times anchor. Because when you know why you're doing what you are doing, when you have a clear, compelling reason that goes beyond personal comfort and accumulation, the hard times become endurable in a way they simply are not when you lack that foundation. Think about a parent who is going through extraordinary hardship. Think about the sacrifices that parent will make, the discomfort they will endure, the exhaustion they will push through because the purpose is clear. The children, the family, the future they are building for those they love. That purpose gives the difficulty a context that transforms it from mere suffering into meaningful struggle. It does not eliminate the pain, but it gives the pain a reason to exist. And a pain with a reason is profoundly more bearable than a pain that seems to serve no purpose at all. This is why I urge everyone, especially those in the midst of difficulty, to spend serious time with the question of purpose, not as an abstract philosophical exercise, but as a survival tool. Ask yourself what matters most to you. Ask yourself what you would regret most on your deathbed if you abandoned it now. Ask yourself what the best version of your life looks like and what role the work you are currently doing plays in arriving at that life, and then let those answers be the fuel that keeps you moving when the circumstances offer every rational argument for stopping. Because here is what I know about purpose. It is stronger than circumstance. When purpose is clear and compelling, circumstances become context rather than conclusion. They influence the path, but they do not determine the destination. The person who knows why they are going somewhere will find a way to get there even when the usual roads are closed. The person who has no clear why will stop at the first significant obstacle, not because they are weak, but because they have no sufficient reason to push through. So right now, in the middle of whatever difficulty you are navigating, I want you to ask yourself, what is my why? And if the answer comes quickly and clearly, hold on to it with both hands. And if the answer is murky or unclear, then understand that your first order of business is to clarify it, because everything else, the strategies and tactics and practical steps, everything else is secondary to knowing why any of it matters. Let me talk about something I call the education of difficulty. Because when life is hard, you are in school. You may not have chosen to enroll, you may not appreciate the curriculum, you may feel that the tuition being charged is far too high. But you are in school nonetheless, and what you learn during this season will serve you for decades if you have the presence of mind to actually receive the education rather than simply endure the experience. What are you learning about yourself? What are you learning about what you are capable of? What are you learning about who your real friends are? What are you learning about the assumptions you held that turned out to be incorrect? What are you learning about the systems and habits and beliefs that work and the ones that don't? What are you learning about what actually matters versus what you merely thought mattered? Every one of these questions contains a lesson, and every lesson learned during hard times is worth more than the same lesson delivered in a comfortable classroom because it was purchased with something real. It was purchased with struggle and sacrifice and the genuine risk of failure. And knowledge that costs you something is knowledge you keep. It gets integrated into your character rather than just your intellectual inventory. It changes how you actually behave rather than merely how you think about behavior. I have met countless wealthy and successful people over the course of my career, and I have asked many of them the same question. What turned you around? What was the pivotal moment? What was the experience that changed everything? And almost without exception, the answer is not a good time. It is a hard time, a bankruptcy, a failure, a season of loss, a period of profound struggle that forced them to grow in ways they never would have chosen voluntarily. And this is not a coincidence. Struggle is a teacher that comfort simply cannot replace. Adversity reveals capacity that ease keeps hidden. The difficulty you are going through right now is not interrupting your education. It is providing it, but only if you are paying attention. Only if you bring curiosity to the experience rather than only resentment. Only if you ask, alongside all the entirely valid expressions of frustration and grief and exhaustion, the question, what am I learning? Now, I want to address something that is deeply personal for many people who are going through hard times, and that is the question of identity. Because one of the most insidious effects of prolonged difficulty is what it can do to your sense of who you are. When you have been struggling for a long time, and when the setbacks have accumulated and the results have been elusive and the effort has exceeded the return, there is a danger that you begin to identify with the struggle rather than simply experiencing it. You begin to think of yourself as someone who fails rather than someone who is currently navigating a challenge. You begin to internalize the difficulty as evidence of your fundamental worth rather than as circumstance that is external to your worth. This is a critical distinction. What you are going through is not who you are. Your setbacks do not define your capacity. Your current circumstances are not a referendum on your intrinsic value as a human being. They are a season, and like all seasons, they will change. But you must guard your identity fiercely during hard times because the world will often try to reduce you to your circumstances. People will see what you are going through and assume that is who you are. They will assign you labels, struggling, failing, broken, and if you are not careful, you will accept those labels and begin to live in accordance with them. Do not do it. Refuse. Absolutely refuse to allow a difficult season to write your permanent description. You are not what you are going through. You are the person who is going through it. That distinction may sound subtle, but it is enormous. The first version makes the difficulty your identity. The second version maintains your identity as someone separate from and larger than any circumstance you currently face. And when you hold that distinction clearly, something remarkable becomes possible. You can be in the difficulty fully. You can feel it, acknowledge it, respond to it honestly, without being consumed by it. You can be in the fire without becoming the fire. You can be in the storm without becoming the storm. This is not denial. This is not spiritual bypass or emotional avoidance. It is a clear-eyed understanding of the difference between what is happening to you and who you are. And maintaining that understanding is one of the most powerful things you can do for your own resilience and your own continued forward movement. Let me talk about habits during hard times because I think this is an area where many people make a critical mistake. When life gets difficult, the temptation is to let the habits go. The healthy routines, the disciplines, the practices that support your best functioning, these are often among the first casualties of hard times because you are tired and overwhelmed and the energy required to maintain those habits feels like energy you simply don't have. I understand this, but I want to offer you a reframe. In hard times, your habits are not optional extras. They are the scaffolding that holds you together while everything else is uncertain. They are the structure that gives your days shape when circumstances have removed every other form of predictability. And abandoning them in hard times is like removing the scaffolding from a building under repair. The very moment you most need the support structure is the moment you are removing it. You don't need perfect habits during hard times. You don't need to maintain every discipline at the highest possible level, but maintain something. Keep some anchors in place. The morning walk, walk, the reading before bed, the journal, the prayer or meditation, the regular connection with a trusted friend. Whatever practices have supported your best functioning during easier seasons, scale them down if necessary, but do not eliminate them entirely. Because those habits carry more than their obvious function. The morning walk is not only exercise, it is a daily declaration that you are still showing up for yourself. The reading before bed is not only information, it is a daily reminder that growth is still happening even in a difficult season. The journal is not only record keeping, it is a daily practice of processing your experience rather than just accumulating it. These habits are, in a very real sense, acts of self-respect during seasons when self-respect requires the most deliberate effort. And when the difficult season passes, and it will pass, those maintained habits will be part of the platform you launch from. Because you kept the practices alive, you haven't lost momentum, you haven't allowed the difficulty to entirely dismantle the structure of a productive life. You will emerge from the hard season with your disciplines intact, and that is an enormous advantage. Now, I want to spend some time on a topic that is central to everything I have ever taught, and that is the concept of personal responsibility. Because I believe that the way you relate to this concept during hard times is absolutely determinative of what happens next in your life. Personal responsibility does not mean that everything difficult that has happened to you is your fault. Let me be clear about that. Some things that happen to people are not their fault. Illness, accidents, the economy, other people's choices. These can create genuine hardship that the person experiencing it did nothing to invite, and pretending otherwise is not personal responsibility. It is cruelty. But here is what personal responsibility does mean, and why it matters so much during hard times. It means that regardless of what caused your current situation, your response to it is entirely yours. Your next move is entirely yours. The story you tell about what this difficulty means and what it makes possible, that is entirely yours. When you claim that ownership, when you say, I may not have created this situation, but I am the one who decides what happens next, you claim your power. You step out of the role of victim, which is a role with no future, and into the role of protagonist, which is a role with unlimited possibility. The victim says, look what happened to me, and waits for someone or something external to change the situation. The protagonist says, look what I'm going to do with this, and begins to work. And this shift, from victim to protagonist, is entirely available to you regardless of your circumstances. It is a choice made in the interior of a human being, completely independent of what is happening on the outside. I have met people in the most extreme circumstances who had made this choice. People with no money and no resources and no obvious advantages who had nevertheless claimed their agency, who had said with complete conviction, I am going to find a way forward. And I have met people with every advantage, resources, connections, opportunity, who had given their agency away, who were convinced that their difficulties were someone else's responsibility and who were therefore entirely dependent on that someone else to solve problems they had the power to address themselves. And guess which group was moving forward? Every single time, the person who claimed responsibility was the one with momentum. Not because they had fewer obstacles, but because they were engaging with their obstacles rather than waiting to be rescued from them. This is not a comfortable teaching. Personal responsibility never is, because it removes the excuse. And without the excuse, there is no defense against the demand that you actually do something. But the discomfort of responsibility is 1,000 times more productive than the comfort of victimhood, because responsibility leads somewhere. It opens doors, it creates momentum, it moves your story forward, and your story is worth moving forward. Let me talk about faith, and I mean that in the broadest possible sense, not necessarily religious faith, though for many people that is a profound source of strength, and I respect that deeply. I mean faith in the sense of an orientation toward the future that allows for the possibility of good things happening even when current evidence is contradictory, because this is what hard times most aggressively attack. They attack your ability to believe that things can improve. They present you with a sustained accumulation of evidence that the situation is bleak and getting bleaker, and they dare you to believe otherwise. And the human mind, being a pattern recognition machine, is naturally inclined to extrapolate from current evidence. If things have been hard for 6 months, the mind concludes that things will likely be hard for another 6 months. This is logical. It is also frequently wrong. Faith is the discipline of choosing to hold the possibility of change even when current evidence doesn't fully support it. It is not naive optimism. It is not wishful thinking that ignores reality. It is the recognition that your current circumstances, however challenging, do not have exclusive rights to your future circumstances. Things can change. Situations can improve. People can find resources and strategies and opportunities they did not previously have access to. The map of the possible is always larger than the map of the current. And holding that recognition, maintaining faith in the face of contradicting evidence, is what allows you to keep looking for the door when the door is not immediately apparent. Because if you believe no door exists, you stop looking, and if you stop looking, you don't find the one that's there. Faith keeps you searching. Faith keeps you open. Faith keeps you in motion when the motion itself is not yet producing visible results. And it is often during that period of motion without visible results that the breakthrough is being assembled just below the surface of the visible world, where your eyes cannot yet reach, but where your continued movement is absolutely essential. Now, I want to say something about the people who are around you when life is hard. And specifically, I want to talk about how you communicate your struggle, because there is a real question here. Who do you tell? How much do you share? How do you ask for help without broadcasting weakness? And my answer is this. Be strategic about who you share your difficulty with, but do not make the mistake of suffering in silence out of pride. Pride that prevents you from accepting help is not nobility. It is a liability. It keeps you carrying alone what others might willingly help you carry. It isolates you at the moment when connection is most necessary, and it denies other people the dignity of being useful to you. There are people in your life right now who would genuinely like to know that you are struggling, not to gossip about it, not to use it against you, but because they care about you and would feel privileged to be someone who showed up for you during a hard season. And by keeping them in the dark to protect your image, you are denying them that opportunity while simultaneously carrying more than you need to carry alone. Now, I am not saying to broadcast your difficulties to everyone. There is wisdom in discernment. There are people who are not safe with your vulnerabilities, and you should know who those people are and guard yourself accordingly. But there are also people who are safe, who are trustworthy and caring and capable of genuine support. And with those people, be honest. Tell them the truth. Let them in. You will be surprised how much lighter the burden becomes when it is shared with someone who is genuinely in your corner. And here is something beautiful about this. The act of allowing yourself to be supported is not just good for you. It is good for the relationship, because nothing deepens a human connection like being trusted with someone's genuine struggle. The friend who sees you only at your best knows a version of you. The friend who stands beside you in your difficulty knows you. And being truly known, not the curated version, not the performance, but the actual person navigating actual challenges, being truly known is one of the deepest human needs, and hard times handled wisely give you the opportunity to meet that need in the context of your most important relationships. Let me talk now about the body, because so much of the conversation about hard times is about the mind and the spirit, and we sometimes neglect the very real fact that you are living through your difficulty in a physical body, and that body is under stress. It is carrying the weight of your worries. It is absorbing the impact of your anxiety. It is being affected, sometimes profoundly, by what you are going through emotionally, and if you do not tend to it, it will demand your attention in ways that compound your difficulty rather than relieve it. Sleep matters. I cannot overstate this. When you are in hard times and the mind is full of worry and the nights are restless, sleep becomes a battlefield rather than a refuge. But sleep deprivation is not just uncomfortable. It impairs your judgment. It reduces your emotional resilience. It diminishes your capacity to see clearly and respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. It makes the hard times harder. So whatever you must do to protect your sleep, the routines, the boundaries around technology before bed, the conversations with a physician if necessary, do it. Your sleep is not a luxury, it is a survival necessity. Movement matters. Your body was designed to move, and when you move, something happens biochemically that no pill can fully replicate. The stress chemicals that hard times generate need somewhere to go. Movement gives them somewhere to go. It does not solve your problems, but it changes the state from which you approach them. A mind that has been carried through a long walk or a run or any form of physical exertion is a mind more capable of clarity and perspective than a mind that has been sitting motionless with its worries for hours. Nutrition matters. This sounds mundane in the face of significant life challenges, but it is not. What you put into your body affects how your brain functions, how your emotions regulate, how your energy sustains. Hard times often produce habits of eating for comfort rather than function, and while there is nothing wrong with occasional comfort, a sustained diet that depletes your physical system will make every other aspect of navigating difficulty harder. Take care of the vehicle because you need it to take you where you are going, and where you are going is somewhere worth arriving. Let me circle back to something I touched on earlier because I want to make it even clearer. The people who emerge from hard times better rather than bitter, and I have studied these people carefully, share a common trait. They did not wait for the difficulty to end before they began growing. They grew in the middle of it. They did not say, I will become a better person when things improve. They became a better person as the instrument through which things improved. This distinction is everything, because the person who waits for conditions to be right before they begin improving will always be waiting. Conditions are never permanently right. There is always another challenge on the horizon, another winter following the brief summer, another difficulty waiting its turn to arrive, and the person who can only grow in comfortable conditions will spend most of their life in a holding pattern, waiting for circumstances that may never materialize as expected. But the person who learns to grow in any season, who extracts lessons from difficulty as naturally as they enjoy blessings from ease, That person compounds. Every season, no matter how challenging, adds to who they are and what they are capable of. Every winter makes the spring more productive. Every valley crossed makes the mountain more reachable. They are in a state of continuous expansion that is not dependent on the cooperation of circumstances. And when you meet such a person, you know it immediately. There is a depth to them, a calm, a kind of settled strength that comes not from the absence of struggle, but from having been through struggle and having discovered their own capacity to navigate it. They are not fragile people who have been protected from difficulty. They are seasoned people who have been through difficulty and have allowed it to season them. And the seasoning shows in everything about them, in how they speak, in how they carry themselves, in the quality of their counsel, in the strength of their presence. That can be you. In fact, the difficulty you are currently in may be the very process that is creating exactly that kind of depth and strength in you right now while you endure it. You may not be able to see it yet because you are too close to the process, but trust that the process is producing something real. Trust that the fire is not destroying you, it is refining you. Trust that the difficulty is not your end, it is part of your becoming. And when you come through it, when you stand on the other side and look back at the valley you crossed, you will see it. You will see what was built in you during the hard times. You will see the strength that was not there before, the wisdom that was not available before, the compassion for others who struggle that you could not have had before you struggled yourself. You will see the full picture that you could not see from inside the valley, and it will not look the way it felt from the inside. From the inside, it felt like loss. From the outside, it will look like the foundation of everything that followed. And that, ultimately, is what I want to leave you with tonight. Not the simple comfort that things will get better, though I believe they will. Not the shallow reassurance that your pain is not real, because it is real, and I refuse to minimize it. But something deeper and more enduring than comfort. The understanding that difficulty is not the opposite of your best life. It is frequently the corridor through which your best life is accessed. The understanding that what is hard right now is making something in you that easy never could. The understanding that you are not a victim of your circumstances, but the author of your response to them, and that your response, chosen with intention, sustained with discipline, powered by purpose, is what ultimately writes your story. You are not what you are going through. You are who you are becoming. And who you are becoming in the middle of this difficulty is someone I think you are going to be very glad you became. Hard times will pass. They always do. But the person you become in the midst of them, that is permanent. That is the gift that the difficult season gives if you are willing to receive it. That is the return on the investment of struggle, not just survival, transformation. So take courage, not the courage of someone who has no fear, but the courage of someone who has fear and moves forward anyway. Take courage and do the next right thing and then the thing after that. Stay in the game one more day. Keep your habits. Guard your identity. Claim your response. Connect with your purpose. Let the difficulty teach you. Let it strengthen you. Let it do what only difficulty can do. Strip away everything that is not essential and reveal the core of who you actually are. And then from that revealed and strengthened core, build something magnificent. Build the life that you came here to build, not despite the hard times you have been through, but with everything those hard times deposited in you, because that is the life you are capable of. And I believe, with complete conviction, having watched people do it again and again throughout my lifetime, that you are more than capable of living it. The question is not whether the capacity is there. The capacity is absolutely there. The question is whether you will claim it. I believe you will. Thank you.